Hi there and welcome back to my channel. My name is Fallon and today I'm going to be sharing with you some trim tools that I have been using for half square triangles. So if you're like me, half square triangles can be a little bit daunting. There's a lot of work that goes into getting them really perfect, along with making sure you have a nice straight diagonal to base your stitches off of. You want to make sure you're not pressing too much to distort your square. There's trimming involved to make sure it's perfect and matches up with all of your other half square triangles in your project. It can be a lot of work. It seems like such a simple block, but little things can go wrong to, make them not work out just right. So I often use trim tools to help me get a nice perfect half square triangles, and for a long time I have been using these clearly perfect slotted trimmers. I've seen other people use them and I finally jumped in and grabbed one because doing them the way I was in the past wasn't really working out all that great. So I've been talking about these a lot on my channel. I've used them a lot on my channel, and I was really adamant about these being a great way to do half square triangles. Well, a couple weeks ago I went to my local quilt shop, was looking around for other things, and I saw a whole bunch of these different template tools by Studio 180 Designs. I think it's Deb Tucker that has designed a lot of these. I actually picked up some other ones that I'm going to try out as well. The wonderful woman who was working at the quilt shop that day saw me looking at him, came over and asked if I'd ever used him before. They actually do classes there at that quilt shop showing how to use a lot of them, and she was very much likes them and like to talk about how wonderful they are. So I ended up buying two, and she also showed me that they have a ton of patterns that correspond to these different templates. You can of course use them for any pattern that calls for a size that you can cut on them, but even though I really stood by, however you want to say it, these clearly perfect slotted trimmers, I was like, well, you know what? Sometimes it is worth your while to try something new. I always like something that can make my life easier, so I thought I would give it a try and just see how it worked, and I'm really glad that I did. I will probably still use these, but there's a lot of things about this that I like. One being price. It is slightly cheaper than the clearly perfect slotted trimmers. So that is always a bonus if you don't already have a trim tool for half square triangles, is having something that works really well but is a better price. So before I can keep rambling, which I love to do, let's jump in and take a closer look at both of these and see how they work. Okay, so first let's take a look at both of the different half square triangle trimmer tools. So the Tucker Trimmer 1 is a square that has offerings on each side of whole half square triangles. So you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then on the other side 1.5, 2.5, 3.5, 4.5, 5.5, 6.5. So essentially between this one and the clearly perfect slotted trimmer, you will get the same cuts. You'll be able to make the same sized half square triangles. So you can see on this one it references like the half circle side and the circle side. So if you're looking at one of the actual Studio 180 design patterns, it'll reference what side you're cutting them on. So I really think that when it comes down to what you can cut with these, you're going to have the same options. This one, you have one square, one template to find and look for, keep track of. But really, if you put these together, the halves on this side and the whole numbers on the other, you kind of get the same thing. It's just presented in a different way. Now, to really show how these work, we're going to first have to make some half square triangles. So I'm going to set these to the side, and I have 2 different squares that I'm going to sew together so we can cut them and see how these work. So I'm just going to put my squares right sides together. These are 3-inch squares, and I'm not going to mark them. You will want to know where the center line is or some way to sew these, because I'm going to be sewing a 1/4 inch along each side of the center line, and then I'm going to be trimming these down to 2.5-inch squares. So since I'm not going to be marking down the middle, I am going to use some diagonal seam tape to help me identify the center line and a 1/4 inch from the center line on each side. So you'll see that on my sewing machine when I go to sew these. So I am going to have a pressing mat and my iron ready so I can show you how to use both of these. But for now, let's head to the sewing machine and sew these squares. Okay, so you can see I have a 1/4 inch away from the center, a set of stitches along each side of the center line. So what we're going to do here is a little different for each method. Now, for both of them, we're going to cut down the center of these, leaving a 1/4 inch along each side. But for one method, we are going to be pressing our squares open, and for one, we're leaving them unpressed until after we finish. So for the Clearly Perfect slotted trimmer, we're going to select the one that has half sizes, and what we're going to do is find the 2.5 line, because we're trimming these down to 2.5 inches, and you'll see there are 2 different markings here. We have one that's a dotted line and then one that's a solid line. So the solid line is going to be the end here of our cut triangle, and then the dotted line represents the stitches. So one thing that I would like to let you know is you'll kind of want to pay more attention to the dotted line when you're trimming, because that's what's going to matter most for squaring up your triangle. So what I do is I find that dotted 2.5 line for this one, and I try to line it up the best I can on my stitches. And depending on how well you you sew, it could be very easy to get that lined up nicely, or it could be a little difficult. It's pretty good this time. So then you just trim along each side. And here where these slots are, you can trim those as well, and that gets rid of your dog ears. So you can see when you open up your triangle, or into your square, that those ears along the end are off, which makes it a lot easier for sewing later, because those don't get in your way of matching up the seam. So if you see when you open this one up that hasn't been trimmed, you have those ears hanging off. So when you lay your squares together, you know, that's kind of a distraction when you're sewing, seeing that sticking out. So it's kind of nice getting rid of that. So let's set these to the side and look at the tucker trimmer. So for this one, you are going to press your triangle open into a square first. So I'm going to press to the darker side so that, you know, I don't see this seam behind there. So let me finger press it open, because I don't want to stretch my fabric too much. And after I finger press it open, I just kind of lay the iron on, and I don't press or try and distort this in any way. So while I have the iron out, I'm going to press open my square, my half square triangle that I already cut. And I do the same, I kind of press it open with my fingers first, and then I don't press the iron and press anything out to distort it. All right, so here is my half square triangle that is already trimmed using the Clearly Perfect slotted trimmer. And now we're going to take the Tucker trimmer and we're going to use the half circle side because we're trimming this down to 2.5 inches. And what we're going to do with this one is, you see this center line going down the diagonal of the block? We're going to line that up on our seam. And then we're going to really make sure that we have some excess fabric along all sides with our seam lined up there nicely. Why? Because if we start trimming too far down here where we don't have this dotted line, well, sure, our center line's lined up nicely, but we're going to be trimming off too much here and not have any extra on the other side to trim it down perfectly. So we want to keep this center line lined up nicely, but make sure we have some excess fabric for our initial cut around all sides. So it looks like I'm lined up nicely. So I'm going to trim here and trim here. And then I'll turn. And now I can make sure, since I know these two sides are perfectly trimmed, I can make sure that dotted line is lined up along both sides. Make sure our center line's lined up, and then I'm going to trim both sides. So now we have another perfect half square triangle that is 2.5 inches. And really they look exactly the same, even though we're using two different methods. Now, do I think one method is better than the other? No, because I think you're really going to get the same result. But there are things that I like about both. And so let me kind of talk to you about them. So with the Tucker trimmer, I do like that I just have this one square to keep track of. You know, I don't have to worry about accidentally pulling out the wrong size. You know, if I grab the 2-inch one and come over here to start trimming and then realize I needed the 2.5, it's nice that it's all in one square. I do think that the lines on here are easier to understand because on the Clearly Perfect slotted trimmer, you have all of these extra lines for each one, and it can be kind of confusing as to which one you use. I do like the instructions for the Tucker trimmer a lot more. It's a lot more detailed on how you use it, how you use the cuts. For the Clearly Perfect slotted trimmer, you just kind of had one little snippet on the back that told you how to use it. And I actually, for a long time, didn't even know that I could use this for different cuts. So, for example, the Tucker trimmer pamphlet shows me that I can make quarter square triangles and combination units and the half square triangles. And you can see it gives a lot of detailed information and even a sizing chart for what I need to cut to get different sizes for each. I think that is so useful, and it's something that I'll keep on hand that I can refer back to at different times. I will say though, you see when I used the Tucker trimmer, I had to, let me press another one and show you what I mean. So for the Tucker trimmer, you have to make multiple movements and cuts. So you line it up and you're trimming off two sides, which is essentially the same for the slotted trimmer, right? Because you have it lined up at the seam, and let me see if I can still be in camera in both. So I'm lined up at the seam at my stitches, and I'm cutting two sides. So that really is the same as this one, and then I don't have to rotate anything and can trim off the dog ears. But for this one, I do have to lift it up, turn, and then trim the other side. So I do feel like for the tucker trimmer, there's a little more maneuvering that you have to do. But I don't think that that really affects the value of the trimmer. It's just something to think about, that you have a few other steps. One thing that I do want to point out with the Clearly Perfect slotted trimmer is I think it is one of the reasons my rotary blades can wear down a little bit, because sometimes I will, when I'm hitting in here, I can feel my rotary blade hitting the acrylic a lot more than with this one, where I'm just trimming along the sides. I don't really feel my blade ramming into the acrylic, and I do think it can contribute to dulling down my blade. Or sometimes when I'm cutting, I'll feel kind of a little tick, and I know that it didn't cut through the fabric there, and I think that's because I'm starting to get the blade wear down in certain spots where it hits the acrylic a lot. So that's something to think about too with the Clearly Perfect slotted trimmer. I do think, and I've been a huge advocate for these for a lot. I've used them in a lot of videos, talked about how much I like them. I still do. I still see the value there. But if you don't already have a trimmer like this, I would say that the tucker trimmer is probably going to be the one I'll grab more often now. I think it's a little bit easier to use, and I feel like I can see these coming out a little more accurate if I don't have a perfect sewn seam. Why do I think that? Because sometimes, here, this one isn't pressed. Sometimes when I lay my trimmer down and I'm trying to line up along the stitches, if my stitches are a little wavy, I feel like after I've trimmed and cut, when I press open, because of that waviness, my square isn't a perfect square anymore. Now, if I already have a pressed open square, like you have to do for the tucker trimmer, and it's not trimmed yet, and you have a wavy line through here, well, you can kind of still move this in a way where when you trim one side and turn it to trim the other, you can line up along here and kind of finagle it into being the perfect size. Also, something to think about, if you are someone who, when you go to press and really like to press your iron, and you might stretch out the square, having it pressed first, then bringing it over to trim, you're still going to get that perfect square, because when you lay this down and trim around, since you already did your pressing and you've warped your fabric a little bit, when you bring it over to trim, you can kind of fix that pressure you've put into the square to distort it a little. However, with the trimmer, you're already going to have it trimmed before you press. Now when you bring it open, if you add that distortion by ironing too heavy, well, it's going to be tough to fix after that. So just something to think about. I think they're both awesome tools. I think they both come in handy, but I do really like all of the information that you get in the pamphlet in this one. I do like that since I'm trimming after I press, I don't have to worry as much about maybe being heavy-handed on the iron, or not taking the time to finger press my seam open first and then ironing instead of trying to use my iron to press it open. Just things that sometimes I am in the middle of doing a bunch of these and don't really think about, and then I realize later when I'm going to sew all my half square triangles together that some of them are kind of wonky because I didn't take the time to make sure I was pressing instead of ironing. So I don't know, let me know what you think in the comments, what you think about both of these. I was pleasantly surprised by the Tucker trimmer, I have to tell you. I was gung-ho on these, but after using two different methods, I can kind of see why, you know, trying out something new can kind of lead you down a different road for liking something new and having a new way of doing something. So like I said, let me know in the comments what you think about both, what your favorite method for half square triangles is, so I can check that out. All right, you guys, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.